This is a conversation with Gabrielus Landsbergis. Gabrielus is the visiting fellow at the Stanford University Institute for International Studies and a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, a role that he held between 2020 and 2024. Like many of his Baltic colleagues, he held and holds a very hawkish view on Russia, on supporting Ukraine, and on European defense and security. But what I find makes him unique is that he's also extremely openly critical of European leadership on all these issues, criticizing what he calls Europe's appeasement of Trump, insufficient support for Ukraine, and indecisiveness in facing Russia. All the while, he has personal first-hand experience with the same leadership that he's criticizing. He has been in many of the rooms where the decision and policies were made, and he knows the leaders taking them. And so we discussed the ongoing negotiations over the US 28-point peace plan proposal, the European response to it, what's going to come out of it in the end, and what Europe should be doing instead. And we also talk about Europe's geopolitical strategy, or the lack thereof in general. Why does Europe seem to be stuck in a strategic impotence, unable to take the lead or responsibility for itself? Whether that's starting to change or how it should be dealing with America led by Donald Trump, and much more. This podcast and interviews like this can exist only thanks to its supporters on Patreon and Substack, to whom I'm deeply grateful, and who get a bunch of perks in return for their support, including the full ad-free version of this and other episodes, and additional bonus content. And if you want to get even more geopolitical analysis, I also write a newsletter. You can find the link in the description. And now, enjoy the conversation. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So there's a lot to talk about your writing, your work, your thoughts on some big European geopolitical issues. But I think we need to start on what's happening right now. With basically, we're recording this on Monday, November 24th. The negotiations around the plan proposed by the United States, the 28-point plan for peace in Ukraine, are still ongoing. It's all very chaotic. It's very unclear what's going to come out of it, if anything. What are your thoughts on all of that at the moment, both on the plan itself, but also on the situation and how we got here, that we're actually it seems that we're seriously talking about a plan that probably would have been quite unthinkable not that long ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's shocking that this plan is accepted as some sort of a basis for conversation. I mean, what is not so shocking is the principal United States position, because the way that it was structured, the position was structured immediately after the inauguration. It's pretty much like we're seeing right now, right? So it's much closer to Putin. It's much closer to the talking points that have been, said by Kremlin a number of times during the war. And so it has been, since February, it has been rather understandable that this administration is going the different way. Now, there has been some hopes throughout the months that, that situation has gotten better. And, we've seen Trump shifting his position, getting, at least on the fence rather than on, closer to Kremlin. But now, it's turned around and we're back to square one. What is shocking is actually that we're debating this as something serious, right? So I've always said, well, even if Americans would suggest something like that, so first of all, I don't have I don't understand how Ukrainians would be able to accept it, and secondly, how Europeans are going to accept this, because they're also involved, right? If you're talking about sanctions, if you're talking about the continuous support, without a European say in this, it's impossible to have this thing. So, but here we are, and really, if it continues, if the plan remains at least in the current framework, it is a very dangerous time for Europe, not just for Ukraine, but basically we're legitimizing aggression in the European continent, and the legitimizer is the global power, the United States.
Well, why do you think the response is so different this time? Because when it first came out, my initial assumption was that, okay, we've seen several proposals like this, and they usually never led anywhere and kind of disappeared after a pretty short while. But this time, it does seem, as you said, that we're taking it and discussing it quite seriously. So, what is different?
Um, I think that there are several elements in what is happening. I think that the U.S. administration are feeling that's my assumption is that they're feeling that they need a win. Maybe they're coming out of the municipal elections in several places in United States in a weaker position that they thought they will be. They might, they're approaching the midterms with not so clear path as to how to handle this, and that means that they are, looking for something that they could put on the table that, first of all, diverts attention from the internal matters. Again, puts President Trump in a position of a peace president with the biggest prize of them all, settling the conflict in Ukraine, and. So kind of, I think that it also has this, domestic internal dynamics element in the whole situation. Ukrainians are also, in a tough spot, with the biggest corruption scandal, taking place. And, imagine if now not for, if President Zelensky would not be engaging in the conversation about this plan, he would be explaining to the parliament, to the NGOs, to the civil society in the streets of Ukraine about what he's going to do with the closest advisors that he has, or the ministers, so on and so forth, right? So for him, it also provides an opportunity domestically, right, to divert the attention. Europeans are the only ones who are literally shocked and without any significant leverage. They're going to foot the bill. It's about the European security as much as it's about Ukrainian, but they're nowhere to be found. But it's, from my point of view, it's our own doing, right? So we had our chances to fix the situation, to put ourselves in a much stronger position, to develop a leverage. We didn't do that, so so here we go. And Russians, I know that there has been a lot of talk about that, so that they basically leaked the document, knowing that how much noise it will create and pressures that it will create. Well, they're not in an excellent position as well, right? Even though they delivered some of the victories on the battlefront, but the economy is clearly tanking. They need access to foreign capital. So I mean, there's a lot of crazy interest in this, or at least not interest, but I mean, the parties are engaging potentially for different sort of reasons, at least in my mind. To sum it up, I think that Ukrainians, I believe, my sense is that they will probably think that it's something like a mineral deal, where you buy time, you engage, but then you kind of sneak out at the last moment, and it's not the same, very much not the same deal that it has been offered at the beginning. Americans, I don't know. It's very difficult to tell what's their end game. Maybe actually a win. And Russians, well, they believe that they can build enough leverage and to win this.
And do you think that for the Ukrainians, because yeah, it seems that Europeans are not playing much of a role, do you think that the Ukrainian strategy of engaging with it, but then hopefully not letting it turn into some kind of a finalized deal in this stage, in this form, do you think it's a good strategy to choose?
It's a very dangerous one, right? Because you're already engaging, and as far as I understand that there has been a request, at least from publicly, what has been said publicly, that there has been a request by Washington to talk in positive terms about the plan, right? So if Ukrainians did that, when you start doing that, so you're becoming part of it, right? So it's becoming more and more difficult, to disengage on a later stages. So I don't know how to manage that. I mean, I'm hearing that the pressure that currently Ukrainians are under has never been like that. That's an enormous pressure, and so I'm not sure. I mean, my thinking is that it's up to Europe to offer Ukrainians an off ramp, basically to suggest a different plan, and basically invite Zelensky to Brussels or wherever, Warsaw and start discussing a different sort of plan again, and and give him a chance to say, okay, so there are two interesting choices. One is American, another is European, and I'm taking into consideration both. So kind of not allow him to stay in the corner.
Yeah, well, it seems that so far the main European response has been a lot of surprise and confusion. I haven't really. It seems that maybe unlike before, where it seemed like some kind of a concentrated effort to change Trump's mind, so far there hasn't been that much of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the timing and the very short deadlines probably provided, to the shock. The second thing probably is that Ukrainians engage with the plan because there's always hope that that Ukrainians will do the right thing, right? So if something like that comes their way, Zelensky will stand up, and in the spirit of his public address that he did a couple of days ago, he will say that, look, it's we might lose an ally, but our country's dignity is worth more, and then Ukrainians will basically just come after that. But now they're in much tougher position because it seems as Ukrainians are engaging with the plan, right? So that leaves Europeans completely out of the whole thing. And what, for example, does it mean if Zelensky agrees on lifting sanctions with Americans? Like, does it mean that Europeans are going to just to gather and rubber stamp something that has been agreed in Geneva? I don't think so, right? So that's a bit tough. My thinking is that the biggest leverage that Europe has always had and always possessed is money, and there's some money hanging around. It's the frozen assets, and I don't think that there has ever been a better time now to figure out what to do with that. Right. So, I mean, if Europeans and Ukrainians would agree that Ukraine is going to be funded for 5 upcoming years from the money that Europeans were able to use, and basically makes the whole conversation between Americans and Russians basically obsolete. Okay, so you discussed, you're not footing the bill. Americans are not paying anything. Europeans are paying, and well, fine. You agreed, but nobody talked to us. We're just going to do our own thing. So that changes the dynamics completely, and I believe that would be the best thing to do now.
Do you think something like that could happen or is going to happen? And if not, why does it seem that we as Europeans are just sort of unable to come up with a plan like that? Or we haven't why hasn't it happened so far? And I'm kind of skeptical it would happen now.
I have my skepticism. My hope is always that that people will be shocked into the realities of the situation, right? Because for us, it's usually we meet, we talk, right, and everything is kind of, well, we didn't find a solution this time. We'll figure out in 3 months later, and we just kick can down the road, and so it continues. But suddenly, what Trump does is he provides the shocker moments where okay, so fine, if we don't find a solution, so what's left for us? Americans have agreed on something with Russians that is entirely unacceptable for Europeans, and what we are going just to sit there and accept that. The big part of the world already doesn't take us seriously, and it's just going to deteriorate. So that is my hope, right? So that it kind of this deterioration of authority, any remaining authority of Europe is provides motivation to make a decision. The date is there, so it's 18th of December. The European Council is going to take place in Brussels. The leaders are meeting, and they will at least now it is promised that they will discuss this. So it's sufficient time for European Commission to prepare the decision and try to convince those leaders who are still reluctant. Also up to the capitals, right? So so if Macron or Merz would start calling Belgian Prime Minister now, I think that they still have time to convince him.
Just a quick break here. If you care about geopolitics, and I assume you do since you're listening to this, you might want to consider signing up to get my newsletter. Station Zero. Once every week or two, you'll get a free geopolitical analysis, a story, trend, or pattern of something that's really important but that most people tend to miss. Like the one where I talk about the major threat that Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, is facing, why he's increasingly likely to be defeated in the next year's elections, why his new challenger is not at all who you would expect, and why it might be a lesson for politicians everywhere. If you want to sign up, just click the link in the description. And now, back to the conversation. Well, it does seem that there has been some kind of a European counter proposal, although that is also very confusing from the public information because the Telegraph published that counter proposal, which basically rejects some of the things from the original one, like the cap on the Ukrainian military, but includes some like reparations from Russia. But then Marco Rubio just said that he hasn't actually seen anything like that formally proposed. So it's all a bit confusing whether it's actually happening or not. But what is your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is, that Europeans have not been invited at the table. They have not been able to set up their own table, and now it's painfully visible as to, how does that evolve in the reality, right? So every word that Secretary Rubio is saying is basically a humiliation to Europeans, right? Because there have been 27 ambassadors working out alternative plan, agreeing between the capitals, suggesting a plan. Okay, I don't agree with with some part of it, and you mentioned some, or still, I mean, it's a continent made a proposal, and Americans have not even been bothered to read it. So it tells a lot of how Europe is being accepted. And again, we're not talking about the conflict that is, it's somewhere far away in Indo-Pacific, Middle East or somewhere else. It's European conflict. It's just outside, and it heavily affects the way that we are going to be defended or being able to defend ourselves. So it's a big thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it kind of shows that we do kind of have different priorities and interests, at least in the current US administration, where their main priority, the way I understand it, is to just end it. And it doesn't really matter how exactly it will end. While for Europe, how it will end is pretty crucial and kind of existential.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Europe is bracing for not just for the continuation of the conflict, but for the escalation of the conflict into the European Union and then NATO, right? So when just last week, the German generals, the French general, everybody's saying, French general, he comes out and says that, well, France has to be prepared to sacrifice their, sons and daughters. Unheard of. I've never heard French, leadership, military leadership, or political leadership speaking in those terms. Germans were first to say this. That one of the German leading generals a couple of weeks ago said that Russia is able to start a war against the European Union and NATO basically any day now, and we're not prepared. So this is what Europeans are talking about, or at least part of them, right? So the problem is that there is a disconnect. Militaries, intelligence, part of political class, they do see that the threat is immediate and it's existential. And then a disconnect, people who are saying, well, we're still fine with the frozen Russian assets. Let's leave it for a bit because our reputation might suffer. Well, you don't have much reputation when you're, basically occupied. So,
well, to get back to the deal proposed by the Americans, you said that Russians are under significant pressure and Ukrainians are engaging with it, which is different than what the situation was previously. Do you think that because of that, something is going to come out of it this time, or do you think it's more likely that it will just kind of die down again?
oh, well, it's very difficult to predict. I think that we have to be prepared that something might come out of it. So it's not entirely implausible to think that. I'd say that I would wait for three options. Something along those lines. So it's a lot of options still. So it's bad assumption. In a way, it's difficult to assume what is going to happen. So one is that some sort of a deal is forced on Ukrainians. That is really bad for European and Ukrainian security. that allows Russia to restructure, rebuild, and continue their attack. So that's the worst case scenario. The second one is that Ukrainians are able to buy time, right? To win time, to better the deal. Europeans get involved, offer their deal, push that forward. Ukrainians being able to choose the parts that they like. Russians don't like it, and kind of it just basically we see the same situation as now, just very similar dynamics. It kind of emotionally goes down. And the third option is, which again I would mention that it sounds like very low probability, like something of a black swan thing. Something just happens that we have not seen yet. But the thing is that the situation is very volatile, especially in Ukraine. You have the biggest corruption scandal. You have people who are dead against signing any sort of a deal. Many people believe that it would be betrayal of the victims, of the sacrifices that they made during the almost 4 years of war. So why I mention this is because even though it's not very probable, but it's more possible than any time before that something might happen in Ukraine as well that would force either Zelensky to change the opinion, to walk away from negotiations, or something else that I wouldn't even know what it is. But it's just the volatility itself. It's in the air. So usually it is potential that things happen in this atmosphere.
Yeah, yeah. I think that makes sense. It's a good analysis. But the one thing that I find hard to imagine is Zelensky agreeing to a deal that would be seen as a really bad one in Ukraine, because it would be hugely unpopular. And I mean, especially, I guess, among the people in the military who are still probably quite committed to fighting the war.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already hearing that that even the engagement, even his engagement, and kind of willingness to talk about the deal is already perceived not really well. So that means that there's a need, that will be even greater need for him to explain why he does engage in this, and how he sees the path forward. And again, I mean, the environment that he started his engagement with Americans at this stage is not very conducive for trust, right? So people do see, like they see the same people, Rustem Umerov, who he's one of the peoples that are mentioned in the corruption scandal. Now they see him, taking part in the delegation, or at least around it, right? So that doesn't provide a lot of trust.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to maybe take a step back of what's happening right now, I'd like to talk about the bigger picture and the longer term trends as well, because I see you as someone who I think is very unique in the fact that you're very critical of the European sort of lack of leadership, or the mistakes and errors of the European leadership. And I think that there's not that many people with your caliber being so openly critical of it, and I think it's very needed. But to me, the what we're seeing now, I feel like it's just another symptom of this repeating dynamic where Europe is just very, very reactive to what is happening. And instead of being able to come up with an initiative or a plan or a strategy vision of its own, we're just kind of responding to whatever is happening at the moment and to whatever America comes up with. And often we don't like it, but we're unable to come up with a proposal of our own. Why do you think that as Europeans we keep just doing this even 4 years into the war now?
I think that the basic reason, the fundamental reason behind this is that we did not accept that it is a crisis. That is it's an existential crisis for Europe. This is what we didn't accept. We did not. We were not provided by a mandate. I mean, the leaders have not been provided by a mandate because people, in many cases, they do not understand that this is a crisis, right? And they did not. Like, I would use the example of COVID, right? So in COVID, there's a very clear mandate, right? So people are, filling the hospitals, they're losing jobs because businesses are closing, and and they request the leadership to fix it, right? So you have a mandate. In some cases, the mandate is created where leadership sees that something needs to be done, and then they talk to the people and they produce the mandate, right, from top to bottom. So you've seen that happening, the biggest reforms in Europe were probably, from going from the leadership down to, down to the people, and forming the mandate that way, right? So people were not necessarily asking for a single currency in Europe, right? But they were convinced that it's a good thing. So we did not take either. I mean, we don't have one. We don't have the mandate because people, at least in Eastern flank, they do understand. But the further you go to the West, they don't understand that this is needed. And then we did not create one. And that left the politicians in this limbo zone, right? So they kind of they get that it's wrong, they get it's bad, but they are not prepared to make some difficult and expensive changes to, either the decision-making process that would allow Europe to act faster, or, just basically to build up a financial muscle that would help Europe to tackle the crisis. And again, here using the COVID's analogy, look, we borrowed when the COVID hit. We had a fund of 750 billion euros, in order to cover basically everything that we needed, from vaccines to to job losses to just basically the whole rebuilding of Europe after the pandemic. Now we don't have that. We don't even have a defense budget that would somehow bring in the solidarity clause back to Europe, right? So it's every country has to build up on their own. It's very different than how Lithuania has means to build up, and then Germany. Europe has always been about solidarity, and now we don't have that. So so Europe was unprepared to meet this crisis, then neglected while it was there, and now we're basically at the worst part of it. We're unprepared. The crisis is getting worse, and it probably will get worse from this. And here, going back to your kind words, is that basically we need more voices that would first of all build pressure on the leadership, but also to explain to European people that we are at the existential crisis. If Europe is attacked, I mean the European Union is attacked, I'm not sure whether the European Union would survive, whether NATO would survive, and that would affect everyone. That would affect the southern countries, northern countries, east and west. So, so kind of this understanding has to sink in.
Yeah. Well, to me, it also, or another factor that's part of it, to me, it seems like there's maybe a lack of a mindset shift of kind of being more aware that America is not really in the role that we've had it there for many decades. And it seems, and that's where I would really like to hear your view, because these people who are leading the European countries, you've been in those rooms, and it seems to me that sometimes, at least, like the realization that America is not really leading anymore is not there. Would you agree with that? Thank you for listening to the free part of this interview. The conversation is not over yet, but the next part is only for the paid members on my Patreon or Substack. I try to make the best possible geopolitics content, and I put a lot of effort and time into this podcast. And there's quite a lot of costs that I have to pay that are associated with it. It's the supporters on Patreon that allow me to do all that, and making part of every single interview exclusively available only for them is my way of saying thank you, since without them, it just wouldn't exist. So if you want to listen to the rest of the interview, ask questions to guests who appear on the show, or myself, get bonus content and my own takes on geopolitics, become part of an active community of geopolitics enthusiasts, and most importantly, make the continued existence of this podcast possible, do consider becoming a supporter. It really helps. To join, you can find the link in the description or go to patreon.com/decodinggeopolitics.